Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of our Evincible Deep Tech series. This is where we dive into the details behind accessibility technology at scale. In our first episode, we discussed how one can leverage computer vision and artificial intelligence to automatically detect more critical accessibility issues than one could potentially with a syntax-only approach. In the second one, we had Capital One, which is one of the world's leading financial institutions, come in and talk about how they've built accessibility technology operations at scale. And in the third episode, we dove deep into mobile accessibility and automation around that. Today, we're going to talk in more depth about how to integrate accessibility into your automated testing for websites and for web applications. My name is Navin Thadani, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Evinced. I'm joined by my colleagues, Ben Bracha, who is our VP of R&D, and Kevin Berg, who is our head of systems engineering. In our discussions with large enterprises so far, we've learned that a lot of them are really struggling with integrating accessibility into their automated testing. Some of them have spent more than a year trying to do that and work out the kinks, but they're still not happy with the results. So in this webinar, we're going to share our learnings from these discussions and also highlight some of the new technology that we've built that enable enterprises to seamlessly integrate accessibility into their automated testing. Ben will start with a quick demo of our Flow Analyzer browser extension to establish some of the basic concepts and then give you an overview of the Evinced automation SDKs. After that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, who's going to demonstrate our Selenium Java SDK, just as an example. And then finally, Ben will take it back and talk about all the best practices that we recommend around integrating accessibility into a large number of automation tests at scale, and also about what you can expect from Evinced next that might help you do that in a more efficient way. So over to you, Ben. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Bracha, and I'm the VP R&D in Evinced. And today, together with Kevin Berg, our sales engineering team lead, we are going to talk about web automation accessibility SDKs. And how you can use Evinced automation SDKs to automate your accessibility testing. So this is the agenda for today. I will start with a quick demo of our flow analyzer for web to show you how, when you are doing a user flow testing on your website or application, you can actually leverage it for better accessibility testing coverage. Then I will briefly talk about some of the main concepts that we use when we designed our Evinced automation SDKs to enhance accessibility automation. After that, Kevin will do a deep dive demo of how to use our existing Selenium Java SDK for accessibility automation. After this demo, I'm going to talk about some practices of how to use the SDKs in large test suites, which are usually common in bigger companies or enterprises today. Finally, I will talk about some advanced topics that we will address on next webinars, like best practices, how to do CI integration, snapshot testing, and so on. Okay, so let me start with a quick demo of the Flow Analyzer for web. Here you can see an example site that we built for the purpose of this demo. It actually mimics a very common vacation booking site. Usually these sites have like a main form where you can select your preferences, click search, see a list of options, and then book the vacation that you want. Now I will start the Evinced Flow Analyzer and start a new analysis session. Okay, let me start the analysis engines. And as you can see, immediately the extension found 7 issues on this page. Some issues related to the dropdown and some for the button. Now I will do a user flow on this page and show you what happens. So commonly when a user starts to use this web page, first he will select the new home that he wants to go to, let's say a tiny house, and the location. Now, as you can see that while I'm interacting and clicking on this web page, the Flow Analyzer keeps tracks of any page changes and trigger the analysis engines. This is very important because today in modern applications and web pages, pages actually contains a lot of different states, a lot of different DOM changes that happens due to user interaction. And all these different states need to be analyzed and aggregated in order to give you a more complete accessibility testing. Now, let me select a date and click search. Usually when you are doing a user flow, you also navigate between different pages of a website or single page application. In this case, the flow analyzer will automatically be added every time there is a page change and keep the analysis going on. Now, let me stop the analysis and jump to this second tab here, which shows me the report that summarized the analysis session I just did. So as you saw, we already in this session, we visited 2 pages and the Evinced tool found total of 12 issues. Most of them, by the way, are critical and related to keyboard and screen reader accessibility. So let's go back to automation SDKs. What ideally I would like to do is to take the user flow that I just did and automate it in order to obtain a very good accessibility automation test. But I already can do that and use existing UI automation test of my website or web application. The reason I can use the existing UI automation test is that, first of all, today in modern development teams already investing in writing this kind of tests. So I already have all kinds of tests that I'm checking and playing with my application. On top of that, as we just saw, automation tests can be an ideal driver for accessibility testing coverage. This is because that usually automation tests are checking user flows. And as we saw with the flow analyzer, user flows can give you a very good test coverage of your application or website. Now, trying to do that, you will encounter several challenges. First of all, you don't want to change your existing tests. Your existing tests are focused on functional testing, testing user flows and making sure functionality is working as expected. Unfortunately, today, most of the existing accessibility SDKs requires you to trigger the SDK from within your test code, meaning that you need to change the test flow, and that also had some kind of maintenance and issues along the line. Second challenge that usually happen is that in very large test sets, you will encounter that many of the tests have some overlapping flows. So for example, many of the tests are probably visiting the homepage of your website or a login window. In this case, accessibility testing will yield lots of duplicate issues because of reoccurring pages as part of the flows. So you will need to add some kind of a smart dedupe algorithm or mechanism that knows to identify where issues are added because of overlapping flows and filter them out. Finally, as we discussed on the booking side, today complex applications and website has a lot of different page states and different pages. You will need to somehow build a mechanism that can observe any DOM mutation that happened on the page or any kind of page navigation, whether it was triggered because of a page refresh, URL navigation, SPA routing event, and so on. So you can cover everything, collect all the issues, and create a single report out of it. So these challenges were actually the input that we took into consideration when designing our automation SDKs. And when doing that, we created the following concepts. First of all, the Evinced automation SDKs are built in a way that they can be integrated outside of the test flow. So as you already know, today, many UI test frameworks gives you a test lifecycle. Points in time where you can do some setups or tear down beyond the test flow itself. So the Evinced SDK can actually integrate it to these events of the lifecycle, so you don't need to change any of your test code. Secondly, we added to the SDK a built-in issues dedupe algorithm. So if the SDK encounters repeated pages or page states, we know how to remove duplicate issues. So the final report is more focused and easy to use. Finally, we added a mechanism that keeps track and analyze all different page states and different ways of navigations automatically. So you don't need to take care of that, and eventually you get the full coverage of accessibility. We call that algorithm a continuous mode. Now, let me hand the mic for Kevin to show you a deep dive demo of how to use our Selenium Java automation SDK.
Great. So let's talk about adding Evinced accessibility tests to our existing Selenium tests. So when creating the Evinced Web Selenium SDK, we wanted to solve a number of problems that we found with traditional accessibility testing tools. So here I have an example of a traditional test. And one of the issues that causes a number of additional problems is that we have to interact with the test code directly. And so within each test, we have to add a scan at every point at which we want to check for accessibility issues. So, if we were thinking of an end-to-end flow, we would have to add, every time we go to a new screen or every time that we click on a dynamic element that's going to change or add features of the application, we would need to scan for accessibility issues. And so, in a simple test, we might have to add, 8 or 10 of these at each of the relevant points in the test. And so that causes a couple of different things. First being implementation. So it takes a significant amount of time to then go through each of the tests that we would need to get comprehensive application coverage and add these lines of code into each one of these tests. So that's a lot of a barrier to value. The second thing then becomes maintenance. So every time we add a new feature or feature changes, not only do we have to address the tests, we also have to then review all of the tests for accessibility scans, making sure that we're maintaining that high level of coverage. And so that just becomes a pain point as well. And then the third thing, and perhaps most significantly, is the reporting. Each time with these traditional tools that I call this analyze method, it's checking for a violation and generating an individual report. So again, in our test, we may end up with 10 different reports at the end of a single test that we then have to wade through, deduplicate, and then try and extract the value from. And so this is why that we found that a lot of folks have trouble getting these built into the culture of accessibility in their development process, because it is so difficult to implement, maintain, and get the value from the reporting. And so these were the problems that Evinced was working to solve with our accessibility testing. And so with our the Evinced accessibility SDK, it's very simple. In our test, the first thing we have to do is just pass the Evinced WebDriver an instance of Chrome driver here. And so this is just our regular Selenium driver. We just pass it to the Evinced driver, and that will not impact any of your existing functionality. So whether you're running the test locally or on a local grid or on a third party like Sauce Labs or BrowserStack or Perfecto, none of that functionality is going to be impacted. All that we are doing is adding the libraries, the functionality that we need to scan for accessibility issues. And the next thing here is all we have to do is start the Evinced accessibility engine. Now, you'll notice here that I'm in a before class. And so that means that whether I'm running a single test or running an entire suite of tests or all of the tests, this engine can be started at a singular point, and we can then run as many tests or as few tests as we'd like, and all of the all of the reports will be consolidated into a single report that we'll review here shortly. So there's no issues with debugging, deduplicating, all of that. So once we've got the engine started, then we jump down to our test. And you'll notice here that we don't have to interact with test code at all. The tests maintain exactly as the developers intended. The developers can just continue writing their tests exactly as they had, and we're simply going to add the accessibility issues on scans on top of it. And then, once our tests have completed, we simply in the after class can call the EV stop method, and that just stops the accessibility engine from scanning. And so throughout all of these tests, we are continually scanning. So every time we go to a new page or we click on a dynamic element or anything like that, we'll automatically continue to scan and collect accessibility issues automatically. And then we have a few options. One, we can easily print out a HTML or JSON report using these calls here. Or if we'd like to add some gating, we can use this report object to get the number of issues, filter on severity, and then create an assertion that will fail the test appropriately if we'd like to create a gating mechanism for the introduction of a critical accessibility issues. Great. So now that we have this test all configured to run with the accessibility issues, let's go ahead and run it. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. This is going to run on a local instance of Chrome. It's going to test the Evinced demo site for issues. All right, the site's loaded now. We're going to go through each of these drop downs on the main page here, select where our vacation is going to be, and then that will conclude the test. Pick our date, and then click search. Yep, so we've decided to go to a tiny house in the Great Lakes, and that's completed our test. And so now that our test is done, the reports will be generated, and so we can go ahead and take a look at those. All right, so this is the HTML report that's generated from that test. So we have a lot of the information we need here in order to replicate, identify, and remediate the issue. So first, we've got the URL and the CSS selector. So now we can immediately identify exactly where the issue lies on the page. We have the type of issue, so we know exactly what it is. And then we have the description. Now, the other thing we have here is a link to the Evinced knowledge base, which is an important resource. Here we have information, description more in detail about the issue. We've got some quick fixes surrounding, some copy and paste code snippets. And more importantly, as we're down here towards the theory section, as we're creating this culture of accessibility within our development process, it's important so that people understand why these issues are happening and how to prevent them from happening again in the future. And so we've got sections dedicated in all of our entries in this knowledge base to ensure that everyone, that education is part of the process. So this HTML report is actually going to be replaced very soon by an even better one that I'd like to show just a preview of. And so in addition to all the great information that we saw on the previous report, we're also adding highlighted screenshots, a more intuitive button to the knowledge base, along with the DOM snippets, the broken snippets, and the relevant WCAG guidelines, all in the HTML report. So keep an eye out on that, an eye out for that soon. We're excited to be able to push this update that's going to make this report even more valuable. So in addition to these HTML reports, we also provide a JSON report. And so what this is has all of the information here that goes into creating that HTML report and more. And so this goes great for issue tracking, which is something that the spot testing, which will be added soon, we're excited about. We've got an individual issue ID for each particular issue. We've got a signature here that can be used for that spot testing. All of the information around severity. And then here we have our component ID. Every issue that's relevant is consolidated into a repeating code pattern. So for example, you saw that we had a date picker on the demo site. If each of those individual dates had an issue, it's likely that if we went back to the source code, it would be in a single place that we would go to fix each of those calendar issues. So, you know, in a calendar, we'd have 30, 31 issues that could be resolved in a single place in the code. And so that's what we refer to as a component, which is just a repeating code pattern that would lead back to a single source to be fixed. And so we group all of those using these component IDs. So we can use that here in the JSON. We also have the DOM snippet and you know, first time seen, et cetera. And so this JSON report is accessible from within the test framework and provides a lot of flexibility. So if we want to use these WCAG tags to filter, to organize, to group the component IDs, if we want to filter or gate based on severity, all of this is accessible during runtime, and we can use as part of our filtering, gating, and reporting process. So an exciting way to use these accessibility scans as part of the development process. This JSON report provides all of that functionality. And the last thing that I wanted to show here is our documentation. Our docs page is the developer documentation, developer.evinced.com. We've got complete walkthroughs as far as adding the framework to adding the Evinced package to your test framework. We've got example first tests, how to run complete API documentation. And then down here at the bottom, we have a complete tutorial on how to an example project and how to add your tests. So highly encourage you to take a look at our developer documentation as part of the Evinced platform. So thank you very much, and I will pass it back to Ben.
Thanks, Kevin, for the demo. Now, let me talk a bit about practices that you can use when integrating the SDK in a large test suite. So Kevin showed us that it's very easy to take the SDK and add it for a single test using the lifecycle hooks like before and after, or setup and tear down of the test. But when you are working in a large enterprise and you have a very complicated web application or website, you probably have hundreds or even thousands of UI automation tests. Moreover, in some cases, there is different teams that working on the tests themselves. So usually you may have a team that's working on the test infrastructure and many other teams, service teams or functional teams that implementing tests of the areas that they are responsible. So ideally, you would like to have a single way or a single point to integrate the SDK and do that on the test infra level. When doing that, you can have all kinds of possibilities or options to control the accessibility testing in one place. For example, adding an on-off toggle if you want to turn off the accessibility testing for some reason, or managing a central configuration of the accessibility testing, like ignoring certain issues or different parts of the site or application. Moreover, when the report is ready, you would like to publish the report itself to the CI pipeline so teams can see it and act upon it. Let me show you briefly how these things can be done. Okay, so let me go through a blog post that you wrote about how to integrate the Evinced SDK for testing at scale. As we already saw on Kevin's demo, in order to use Evinced, there are very few simple commands you need to do. First of all, you need to initialize the Evinced web driver that wraps the existing Selenium Chrome driver. Then you can use the commands evstart and evstop to trigger the analysis lifecycle. After doing evstop, you will get a report object contains all the issues found during the analysis. And then you can take this report and, for example, output it to a file, to an HTML file or JSON file, so you can consume later in your CI pipeline. Also, as Kevin showed us, we can use the test lifecycle hooks like setup and teardown in order to initiate the commands we just saw. Starting the Evinced web driver, calling evstart to start the analysis, and after the test, do evstop, get a report, and write it to a file. This way, we don't need to change any of our existing test code. But when you have lots of end-to-end tests managed by different teams, you need to do something more in the infrastructure level. In this case, we give you an example how you can build a base accessibility test class, which can later be extended and used by any other test classes written by different teams. So in this test class, we will just use, again, the setup and the teardown test lifecycle in order to do all the initialization and control of the accessibility testing. So in the setup, we will start the web driver, do an evstart, and in the teardown, we do an evstop, get a report back, and write it to a file. Once we have this base class, any other test class that written by any team can just extend this base class. And that's basically it. Because now when we have this base class, we automatically get the setup and teardown lifecycle that manage the Evinced SDK. So the test class itself doesn't need to do anything related to accessibility testing. Now let's talk a bit about CI integration. When you have CI integration, you probably will want to take all the accessibility reports and publish them to the CI. Moreover, you probably will want to have some kind of toggle or mechanism to control accessibility testing. For example, if you want to turn it off for some reason. So what we did here is added a capability for the base accessibility test to use a feature toggle and decide upon it whether to run accessibility tests or not. This feature toggle can be fetched from environment variables that can be injected by the CI itself. So we just fetch the feature toggle, keep it as a variable, and then we can check its value and decide whether we want to enable accessibility testing or not. As you can see here, we added an if check that if and only if accessibility is enabled, we trigger the evstart and evstop commands. Otherwise, accessibility won't be added to the functional test. Here we can see a specific example from Jenkins, for Jenkins CI platform, how we can use this feature toggle and control it from the CI pipeline. So as you know, Jenkins has this kind of pipeline configuration when you can set the different stages and steps that you want to run. And it also has this environment section where you can define your own environment variables. So we just went and added the accessibility testing feature toggle to the environment variable and set it to true. If we would like to turn off accessibility testing, we can set it to false, and then automatically all tests in our system won't have accessibility testing. Now let's talk a bit about report. So as you saw, when we trigger the evstop command, we will get back a report that we can do some assertions upon it, or write it to a file, an HTML or a JSON file. One of the things that we recommend to do is to output the report as an HTML file and just use it, upload it, and use it in the CI platform. So teams can look at this report and have more visibility around it. The Evinced HTML report is very comprehensive. So when you look at it, you can understand all the issues that found, the origin, the related DOM snippets, the actual pages that found them, and also have a screenshot showing the issue and the context of it. So for example, these are taken from the demo site that we saw earlier. So this is one of the dropdowns that we saw that in this case has a screen reader accessibility issues. And here is another issue on the search button, which misses some ARIA fields. So what's next? Today we saw how to take the Evinced SDK and integrate it with existing UI automation tests, whether if you want to do that on a test level or on the test infrastructure level. So all other tests can use this capability automatically without changing any of the code. In next webinars, I'm going to talk about some more advanced topics and best practices when using accessibility automation in your tests. For example, the Evinced accessibility engines can be configured in all kinds of ways. For example, you can ignore all kinds of certain issues or pages or part of the pages that you don't want to test, or filter your report to meet the criteria that you are trying to achieve. Another topic that is going to be very interesting is snapshot testing. So once you incorporate accessibility testing in your system, one of the things that you want to make sure of that you don't have any regression in terms of accessibility. So you will need a way or kind of mechanism to compare each time you change some code. You need to compare the accessibility results with previous results and make sure nothing was changed, whether new issues appeared or not. So this is for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Kevin, for the demo, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
You can find Evinced on Twitter at Evinced_A11Y, on their website, evinced.com, and also on LinkedIn.